What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic.
I'm Jammin.
And we have yet another album review for you. And honestly, probably the only other new release we had on the radar because, once again, this is kind of a slow week.
Slow.
But we found something interesting to go over. We are going to go over the latest offering from Necrodeath, Arimortis. This also comes out on the 17th of January on Time to Kill Records. This band formed in 1985 in Italy. This is their 14th full-length overall. Now, I got into them a little over 10 years ago with their compilation, Age of Fear. It was my first exposure to the band. I just looked at the cover, looked at the logo, I was like, well, this is going to be metal. This will be fun. Ooh, there's a Slayer cover. Already a good sign. And admittedly, I really haven't caught up much with them. I think I have 7 Deadly Sins and Idiosyncrasy, but apparently there's a lot of other albums for me to check out, and this is just some flat-out old-school thrash, blackened thrash, maybe death thrash.
Maybe.
It's definitely thrash.
It 100% is thrash. I got into this band today. There are a ton of necro bands, Necrodeath, Necrowretch, Necrogoblin, Necrot, tons of them, and I didn't get into this one until today. So it is all of those descriptors, mainly thrash.
And it pretty much stays in that gear throughout. Like, a lot of this, very old school. Like, even down to production, it's very, raw sounding.
Organic.
Yeah, organic's a good way. A little on the compressed side, but, I mean, when it comes down to the style of this band, again, like, thrash is the root, and they kind of, like, dance around that. Like, you do get some blackened flourishes. Mostly it's in the vocals, but there are some moments where, it does take on a little bit more of a black metal character, namely Alien.
Yeah.
Alien kind of sounds a bit like current Dark Throne, which I'm pretty sure Dark Throne fans are probably going to argue they're not black metal anymore, which, I don't know, maybe fair, maybe not, I don't care. But for the most part, this kind of just goes full tilt, boogie, fast-paced thrash metal. Right from the rip, Storytellers of Lies. I mean, it just kind of kicks down the door with, maybe a Slayer riff that I've heard before, but it's a good one.
Maybe.
And, yeah, that's kind of the pace setter for this.
Do you like to go fast? This band likes to go fast. For the most part, it's all pretty fast. Mainly Necrosadist, which it's out to get you. Very, very aggressive in both the riffing and the drumming styles. We're talking about mostly D beats and gallops as far as drumming is concerned. One real cool thing that is in this record, though, that you don't hear often in bands anymore, but you heard a lot in the 80s, which is what this band is from, is very high concert toms, like open high concert toms on the turnovers. Just brings about a little bit more flair, a little bit more of an old touch to a modernistic approach.
Honestly, like, as soon as I heard those, like, big open toms, I was thinking about, like, wow, man, this kind of reminds me of, like, Possessed Seven Churches or, like, Creator, Pleasure to Kill, stuff like that. But, I mean, there's a lot of comparisons you could probably make, like, I would say Art Noir, early Sepultura. I got a lot of early Sepultura. Necrosadist, that opening riff on there, it feels kind of similar to the Escape to the Void riff. It eventually does change up, but, don't worry, it still goes really fast. But also in terms of, like, that more intense, like, kind of later thrash where it was starting to border on the whole death metal thing, like Morbid Saint, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of just breakneck, ultra-fast drumming, like single kick, like thrashy style blast beats, I guess you could say. But you get, like, a lot of fun, groovy pockets, too. And honestly, like, the strength of this album is, I would say, on its riffs. The riffs, well, they are familiar. Like, you've definitely heard a lot of these riffs before, but you've definitely headbanged to a lot of these riffs before, granted by, like, different bands. But the riffs on here, they're straightforward. They just go for the throat. While you could say they are simple, they're also lethal. And I think that's important because this band is definitely still all about the energy and interesting album covers, because as soon as I looked at this album cover, it was like, oh wow, that reminds me of, like, I don't know, 8 or 9 different scenes in 4 or 5 different Fulci movies. Either that or this dude is prepping some Italian cuisine that I don't want to try. Well, this band does throw in some, like, other additional seasonings on here. You get, like, some spots of melody, some acoustic openings that show up, or just acoustic passages that show up on, the title track, New God, No More Regrets. They kind of, do a little bit to kind of set the mood. There's also some interesting vocalizations on here in terms of, like, effects. You get, like, some whispers and screams and that swirling sort of phaser effect on a lot of them. Sometimes they can be a little bit too much, but I'll get to that later. But for the most part, they kind of conjures up this evil but I don't kind of sleazy atmosphere. I don't know. You look at a lot of their album covers outside of this one, it's always like a naked chick. Not that I'm like complaining there, but sleaze, I don't know, it's kind of fun about thrash.
You get a lot of Slayer. It's obvious that these guys like Slayer. It's mostly found in the melodies, especially in the very haunting parts. No More Regrets, the title track, the last track, Hangover, which is a very fun track in itself because there's puke at the end.
Oh, that's how a lot of hangovers begin.
I have been there many times. I feel for it, but yeah. Very much Slayer worship. Slayer, Sepultura, early Metallica. I mean, it's all over this record.
The biggest Sepultura comparisons that I got are in the drums. And not necessarily like the sound of the drums. Maybe in terms of like that open, tom sound, mostly like that early era, before Arise.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the style of drumming. It's that fast-paced stuff and the gallops. That galloping thrash beat that almost borders on a blast, it's something that just instantly reminds me of Igor Cavalera. That's just one of those beats he's known for.
Right. And a lot of tribal drumming, too. Like in the song Alien or in the title track, have these big open moments, usually during the bridge, where it's just a bunch of giant tribal tom work. And as far as that's concerned, it's very surprising for the style that it's in because you don't hear a lot of big open tribal moments like that, and especially blackened thrash. I mean, of course it's in Sepultura, but Sepultura is not blackened thrash. So it was just another cool thing to add a little bit of a flourish to an already made meal.
Yeah, and when you compare that to the riff work, again, is very much on the nose. There's definitely some more melodic flourishes, occasionally some distant melodies, but a lot of it is just machine gun chugging. It's just fast, it's energetic. A lot of it kind of reminded me of Razor. Just kind of go for the throat, play as fast as you can, and just be mean and Canadian, except they're Italian this time. Now, there are some songs that do kind of venture out a little bit more in terms of dynamics and such. There's a lot of fun riff changes on here, but generally the riff changes are all right, we have this big machine gun thrash riff or this just really chuggy part. Let's get into a maybe death metal-ish tremolo here and there, or something that is slightly more blackened. But there are some songs in here that do have some really cool song building dynamics. Alien, I think, is a real standout because it starts off as, again, almost kind of a modern Dark Throne song. It's just one big riff, a mid-tempo groove, and it's almost kind of anthemic. This is the fist pumper. But as the song goes on, it steadily builds in intensity. It starts getting faster. It gets back to those thrashy roots, and then caps it off with, kind of a more thrashy rendition of the opening of the song, and just, adds a little bit of dissonance to it.
And what good would a thrash album be if you couldn't have just one song that was kind of balls out and super heavy, and unlike a lot of the rest of the pack, that would be Near-Death Experience with this super heavy off-time groove that hits in there is a whole lot of fun, but for the most part that whole song is just mid-tempo and just all about a gut punch.
Yeah, I really like how the vocals follow the riff on that interesting little hitchy groove there. It's just sort of an interesting flow, and it's just kind of up and down thing with it. It's got this really fun crawl. That was a big standout to me in terms of grooves on here, because a lot of them are a little bit more straightforward. Hearing something with a little bit more an off-time sort of flair to it, just thought was fun. Probably our biggest standout on here was the longer track on here, Metempsychosis, I think that's how you say it, part 2. Oh. Because there's a part 1 that we haven't heard yet, but I don't know if context was necessary for me to enjoy the fuck out of that song, because it comes in, in a really interesting fashion. It comes in like someone pretty much had the bridge to Angel of Death queued up and then slowly turned up the volume.
That's fair.
It fades in, thrashy, vicious, dive bombs, and then that is kind of the pace setter for that song. It's fast, it's angry, and it is predominantly instrumental. In fact, we didn't hear vocals until about the 5-minute mark out of a 7.5-minute song.
And even so, they weren't actual vocals. It was more of just screaming or whispers or something. So just a little bit more to kind of flavor the pot a bit. But there are easily hundreds of transitions going on in there, just one right after the other. Just every time they finish a riff, they transition into something else. And eventually it all kind of ties back together, but for the most part, it's just riff soup, and it's all really good. Every single riff in that song is pretty awesome.
That was honestly the most fun song on here. It's just constant riff changes, and they're just changing over to again stuff that if you're a long-time thrash fan, and especially if you like your thrash on the heavier side, you're just going to instantly latch onto them. Honestly, that song should have closed out the album.
Agreed.
Which, no disrespect to Hangover. Hangover was a pretty awesome song, and they did find a way to cap off that song in a very entertaining and very, nostalgic way, but not nostalgic in a good way. The old high school heaves. Yeah, I know those. But as, energetic and bombastic as this album is, it can lose momentum. And for me, that kind of showed up when they tried to do too much. A lot of these songs, I think, are at their strongest when they are just latching on to a sound that they are very comfortable with. Full bore thrash. Don't mill around, just kind of go for the throat, punch them in the teeth, kick them in the gut, take your pick, whatever. I mean, they're probably going to put up a little bit of a fight.
Punch to the balls!
Some of these kind of kick in that way. But when they tried to get a little too, I would say, clever for their own good, it kind of lost me. New God. New God, I thought started off really well. Honestly, there's some stuff in there that kind of reminded me a bit of Death, circa Scream Bloody Gore.
Near-death experience too.
But when you hit the bridge on New God, something just goes nuts. They decided to experiment with all the effects and such. You get this phaser guitar lead in, and then all of a sudden the vocals have this tremendous echo on them, and it just sounds like he's just shrieking, and it's kind of panning back and forth, and the drums kind of get a little too clever in terms of the rhythm. It just becomes this muddy, noisy, very busy mess, and then it caps back off with the chorus again, which was cool, but what the hell happened in the bridge?
It just kind of killed the momentum, because that song, I mean, much like the rest of them, goes for the throat as far as the speed and intensity of everything is concerned, but to throw that bridge in was just what are you doing? It was a whole different band at that point. You're not really necessary. The same thing I can say kind of for Metempsychosis, because you've got this really big, long instrumental song that just goes for the throat, and then they bring in vocals. And I kind of found that to be a little bit unnecessary. And then they waited so long. They waited almost 5 minutes. I was like, oh man, we're going to get a whole instrumental song. And then you brought in whispers for whatever reason.
I mean, I suppose for atmosphere, but there's also one really long scream in there too.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe they figured hey, we're playing a lot of Slayer-ish riffs on here. We need an array of scream. And then, they didn't want the vocalist to get too lonely. It's fine, you can whisper. There's also the over frequency of using the acoustic intro. I could see it using once or twice, but they have it 3 times in here. And they don't really stand out from one another very much. It's kind of that same haunting melody that you've heard open up countless other thrash songs before. The title track, No More Regrets, and New God all kind of do that. And again, I feel like those intros are really interchangeable. And for the most part, I like the vocals on here. He's got a good snarly, kind of vicious delivery. But the clean vocals that showed up on No More Regrets, I don't get it. They're not, particularly hooky, and it doesn't sound like this is a song that really needs a cleaner chorus. It kind of opens up with some spoken word, which it kind of sounded like blackened Dave Mustaine, except he was, I don't know, not complaining about the government for once, or people that don't like him, which they also might be in the government too. But the extra vocal dynamic really didn't do much to lift the song up. And again, when they kind of course correct and get back to just the vicious, straightforward stuff, it sounds good. It's fun. And ultimately, that's kind of the experience I've had with what I've listened to by this band. When they're just flying and in your face and being rowdy and, just trying to thrash your fucking guts out of your body. And there is a fair amount of rinse and repeat. A lot of the riffs kind of do sound similar, but at the same time, their riffs I like, so I can't really fault them there. And this is a band that formed in 1985, and I don't think they've really changed around their sound much, nor should they. This is still effective. This is still solid, though. I think they've done it better in the past. So overall, I'm going to give this 3 stars. I think this is a good album. It's pretty decent, across the board. It delivers on thrashy, gnarly riffs. There's some big standouts on here for me. Near-death experience, Metempsychosis, Alien. I mean, there's really solid songs in here. It's just when they kind of try a little bit too hard, some of those songs just don't land. Like there's too much going on for a band that, you know, their main sound is simple and lethal, and it doesn't need a lot of extra seasoning. It just needs to be like a giant slab of meat plopped on a fucking plate. That's when they hit home. And they do that pretty well in here for the most part. Metempsychosis, as far as like riff work, that's probably my big standout. Yep. That song is just flat out fun. I don't know why they needed like a little bit of extra vocal in there. Really didn't hurt the overall enjoyment of that song. It was just kind of a moment. But yeah, I mean, if you're a big fan of Morbid Saint, Slayer, early Creator to early Sodom, actually probably current Sodom too, just stuff like that, check this out. It's pretty decent.
I'm going to go ahead and agree with 3 stars here. This was a good listen. It's just nothing I haven't heard before. It's kind of yet another band that isn't reinventing the wheel, but they are perfectly executing the build of another wheel. So that's kind of where we're at. It's very riffy, and when they do stick to their guns and just go for the throat with thrash, that's where this band fires on all cylinders really well. It's not necessarily when this band branches out of that wheelhouse that they kill it. You can just tell that's not where they're most comfortable. And so like that additional experimentation doesn't necessarily work, but it's a good try. For the most part, the production on this record is done fairly well. Albeit the drums are a little bit compressed, it does have a very natural, organic sound to it. Those guitars definitely have a big crunch. It has good builds in it when it wants to. It is a little scatterbrained. They do tend to skip around a whole lot. And again, it's not necessary, in my opinion, to transition that many times in every song. Like, there's very few parts in here where they really stick to their guns, with the exception of maybe Near Death Experience, which is just a pretty heavy banger. And the time, I guess, where all the transitions didn't bother me are in the gigantic Metempsychosis, which is an awesome song. But outside of that, again, there's nothing really special here. It's just executed really well. If you're into bands, again, like Slayer, The Haunted, maybe a little bit of High on Fire, I heard at times. You get definitely some old school Sepultura going on in here. There are a couple of obituary/death moments. I don't know. If you like that, you might want to check this out. Give it a spin for yourself.
So, if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up. And if you were new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We also have memberships. They are only 99 cents, and we do a members-only live stream, which we are trying to figure out what we're going to do for the next one, whether it'll be an actual subject or whether or not we can just hang out and you can ask us ridiculous questions, because those are always fun.
Help us name our booger troll.
Carl. I think it's a good name. Unless you have something better, which you probably do. Anyway, this is the new way to support the channel more directly. We also have our store, thrallsmetal.com, with our t-shirts and hats. That is linked down below in the video description. And of course, if you would like to join up and become a member of this thing that we do for whatever reason, there's a join button somewhere down below too.
Last but not least, tons of stuff going on at Thralls of Metal, album reviews, discography rankings, discussion forums, multiple segments, Nick's never-ending collection updates, is it metal, is it not metal, states of metal, tons of metal things. What's John Jamming is going to return after the Motley Crue ranking, because I don't want to soil whatever it is I'm going to listen to for What's John Jamming with Motley Crue. I just don't. Nonetheless, thank you guys for being a part of this channel. We appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for helping us get to 20,000 subscribers, which is a crazy number I never thought I'd ever say in regards to anything I've done in life, but here we are. I appreciate you. Nick appreciates you. All of us here at Thralls of Metal appreciate you. Thank you for being a part of this.
Yeah, you guys absolutely rule. Tons of content coming your way. So one more big thank you because of how awesome you are, and it's a lot. And we will catch you later.